It is 5 o'clock in Rochester, New York, and my name is Anna Liss. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for Monroe County, and I am joined today by Joe Corella. He's the Senior Broadband Consultant with Magellan Advisors. Magellan is the contractor that was selected by Monroe County to perform a study analyzing community access to the internet countywide. This contract started in 2021, right on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic. The county executive, Adam Bello, convened a task force of community leaders looking at internet affordability and connectivity countywide because of the increased need for reliable, strong, and affordable internet at home throughout the pandemic because of telehealth, school, learning from home, work from home. I, as planning director, was honored to be appointed by the county executive to facilitate the work of this task force in 2021. We initiated an RFP process, and Magellan Advisors set forth a proposal that was very strong for many reasons. One significant reason being that Magellan worked with Monroe County in 2017, 2016 in a partnership with the city of Rochester to look at our fiber infrastructure. So a lot of institutional knowledge at Magellan about what resources and assets we have here on the ground. We rolled out a public survey this summer online and in hard copy in partnership with the library, asking members of the public to come to us with their questions, their concerns, their experiences pertaining to internet connectivity at home. We had robust participation. Joe and his team are in the process of synthesizing that data. And today's public input session is kind of like a bookend to our public engagement process. We're seeking to give Monroe County residents an additional opportunity to come and meet with us in person and learn about the study and provide their input in person. We also reconvened the task force this morning with Joe to provide them with an update. And County Executive Bello and Congressman Joe Morelli were here at the library this afternoon to share some information with the public about this opportunity and also about the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a relatively new federal program, an incentive for eligible households. And Joe's going to talk a little bit about that as well. So without further ado, hello, thank you for coming. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Joe Corella, Senior Broadband Consultant with Magellan Advisors. Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for attending to this problem. I have a compatriot of mine on the line, Kelly Delacruz. She has helped in compiling some of this data. We'll first go through a little background on what Magellan does, what we were tasked to do, and we'll look at some preliminary results from our analysis. Kelly, next slide, please. A little bit of Magellan obligatory advertisement, sorry. We've supported over 400 municipal and utility clients. We've built over 50 community networks. I have completed 3 in the last 3 years. We've enabled 1 million fiber homes to be connected. Not all of them have subscribed. And we have enabled $1 billion in new broadband investments. Those are whether grant funding, capital or operating expense budgets, or debentures of some kind. Here's what the engagement was justified to do. The focus of our engagement here is around measuring impediments to access and seeing what we can do on improving access. Let's define what access is. Access is if an ISP serves your household that you could choose to subscribe to them. Fair? Doesn't mean you do subscribe to them. It just means that you have access to subscription. There are places that are unserved, that are highly rural or in difficult topographies, and they do not have access to data. And that's a real problem in the 21st century, right? Broadband is seen as, in some cases, a utility. I use that in quotes because it's not regulated as such, but it is seen as necessary to participate in 21st century operations, government services, applying for Medicare, renewing your driver's license, paying your bills, communicating with your family and sharing pictures of your newborns or your grandchildren, as it may be. Just happened, so sorry. So communication is absolutely essential. Broadband access is essential, not quite a utility. So we're looking at populations that have impeded either by location or through other demographic factors or other barriers. We're going to analyze what public and private sectors might be in collaborating and to define how we collect inventory. We have completed a whole series of data collections on GIS layers for infrastructure that exists either owned or managed by the county or by some of the communities in the county. We're going to look at New York State, federal, and nonprofit broadband goals and see what grant funds are available. We're all aware of the BEAD program, which is a huge $42 billion broadband program that the Department of Commerce will be sponsoring in the next year. And then we'll put together a final report. Here's our process. We have done some data sharing and repository collection. We are engaging stakeholders. In fact, you are the culmination of our output, our outreach efforts. We have begun to assess needs. We're looking at network and connectivity requirements. There may be some recommendations that come out of this for expansion in physical plant, whether owned by the county or recommended to private providers or some of the local municipalities. We'll propose a suite of possible solutions, costs, and finances. This is not an authoritative set of recommendations. This is a set of possible recommendations that the county will have to assess and evaluate, right? Leveraging the private sector where possible, deciding on which location should be invested in and with what investments. Should there be subsidies for adoption affordability? Should there be additional investment for infrastructure? We'll look at business models and governance, depending on what comes out of the final solution, and put together a roadmap that will have to be obviously prioritized by county executive and the council. Next slide, please. Quick definitions for anyone in the room. 25.3, those numbers represent megabits download speed and megabits upload speed. So 25.3 says 25 megabits download, 3 upload. The FCC currently defines that as sufficient for broadband. Some of us don't believe that that's sufficient given the number of advertisements and video streams, and that might be an impediment, especially if you have multiple people connecting in your home. Telework, distance learning, telehealth, email. If you have multiple people, it's impossible to survive on just 25.3. ARPA Treasury guidance, that's the American Recovery Plan Act, has proposed grant programs that will make funding available, but the requirement, the quid pro quo on the funding for eligibility is that you have to commit to deliver effectively 100 megabits symmetrical. They finesse that slightly and they say it could be 100 download and 20 upload, but easily upgradable to 100/100. We read that as fiber. There are really no other options. We could not get a professional engineer to sign off on fixed wireless to deliver concurrent 100/100. It just does not work. It might work around this block. It would not work over any extended period of time. And then served are areas that meet 100/100, and those aren't problems, frankly. There may be affordability problems. There may be availability problems in terms of reliable service, but they're not unserved. Kelly, next, please. We need some real-time vetting here of these numbers. Spectrum residential, anywhere from $70 to $130 a month. That supports 940 megabits down and 35 megabits up. Availability, according to the message, to the data, is 99.5%. Very good. Very good. Anecdotally, that's not what the county necessarily hears, right? There are pockets. Again, while the offer of broadband exists at 95%, and let's talk about one potential bias there. The rules say that if a provider serves one household, they can claim the entire census block. The FCC is now adding a second obligation to report at a premise level. and those take effect this year. So Frontier, $55 to $60. Nisus Air Access, a new name for me. There's the residential and business items. Next slide, please, Kelly. Here's our first wave of findings. That coverage tends to be overstated, slight bias. One of the reported providers reported having 100% availability, but in our random sampling of addresses based on actual speed tests recorded, we found unavailable at all to 10 households. The surveys, by the way, covered over 2,000 real-time tests, surveys online, and we sampled to see what the public data showed for areas that were unserved. And these are some of the results. Spectrum's fiber coax cable services provide the fastest services, no surprise. Viasat and HughesNet as satellites are not considered for federal funding purposes eligible. Those are not, satellite services are disqualified. But hybrid fiber and coax is better than other connections, but it's not as efficient as just fiber. And that's a physics question, right? For fiber connectivity, you get light speed transmissions. Your electronics govern the effective speed that you can get, but on cable and copper, you can't transmit as quickly. Many of the advertised fiber solutions on our studies suggests that some of the residents don't have availability, even though it's reported it's available. Frontier's fiber service is only available to one of the 63 residential addresses. And low-cost options are not available, as we saw on the previous slide. Maybe that's considered affordable, maybe it's not. The FCC has a new program called the Affordable Connectivity Program that a household in need, let's say recipient of some kind of federal needs program, SNAP, TANF, housing subsidies, could be eligible for a subsidy of $30 per month per household for broadband subscriptions. And that subsidy makes the provider whole. So if Joe Corella is a household in need, his bill would be reduced by $30. The ISP would be made whole because the $30 that Joe doesn't pay is paid for by the government. And that's a massive program. It's $14 billion and it'll be available until exhausted. There's no time limit on that. And the FCC would say, not everyone that is eligible is applying. They are encouraging accelerated inputs. I don't know if that's what you're seeing. Yeah, next slide, Kelly. So as part of our outreach, here are all the groups that we have spoken with. Some not-for-profits with ears to the ground around Literacy Rochester. We've spoken to EHS, DES, Public Safety and Security, all the members of the Broadband Task Force, and we've allowed them, in addition to our public survey, to provide a private survey to advocate for their individual needs. Kelly? Here we have a summary of the metrics here. Over 1,200 respondents, 61% said that their bandwidth needs have increased since COVID-19. Not surprising. I would expect that's true of almost everyone. But 61% say yes. 94% say that broadband is as essential as other utilities. I want to be very clear. That doesn't make it a utility. That's a perceived need. So 68% have subscriptions, 88% have subscriptions to broadband. 12% have no access to broadband. Now, we did ask this question as select all that apply. So these numbers might not, that 25% in the lower right, that's too expensive, might not be a quarter of the 12% because everybody could pick multiple choices. But let's look at the choices. Accesses through libraries and other community anchors. Says, I don't think I need it at home. Some people don't even think they want broadband or know how to use it or trust it. Some people think smartphones are good enough. Yeah, if you're checking your sports scores, I find my phone sufficient. When I'm writing a document, I find it completely inefficient. 4% say they don't understand why they need broadband. That's an outreach opportunity. In this day and age, Department of Aging is advocating for their people. for their constituents. I don't see how anyone of my age or lower, and that's most people, my age or lower, can survive without broadband and email. Kelly? Median download speeds, a little mathematics reinforcement for those of us who forgot our high school math. Median is, if I rank everything from top to bottom, it's the midpoint. It is not an average. But our median speed's surprisingly good. 83 down, 10 up. Says that the median household, not surprisingly, right? We got 88% subscribing. We'll look at a heat map in 1 second. And we looked at which costs, Charter Spectrum, 75% of the market on the respondents. Monthly costs, the mode at 38% in the $76 to $100 range. So even a $30 subsidy to a household on a limited budget might not be enough to allow them to subscribe, but they need it. Kelly? Here we did a tiered mapping of broadband data costs, how much people are paying for service. And it ranges from red. Might have to change this around. No. Red is cost per megabit. Red is very expensive. I think I might have this backwards. I apologize. But basically what we have here is a heat map based on tiered groups of prices. We might have to invert that scale. Those are where our survey respondents are. Kelly, next slide. Here we did a mapping of download survey speed tiers. Less than 10 megabits per second, less than 1 megabit per second, anywhere from 1 to 25. Both of those categories, orange and red, would be considered unserved by the FCC. Yellow would be considered underserved because it's not at 100 megabits. And green and blue are well served. Now you'll notice, you know the topography better than I in the county. There are some urban areas that have, rural areas that have very few respondents at all. That's telling unto itself from an access perspective. Also, we see a lot of red and orange dots in Rochester itself. That's telling that their speeds that they actually receive is problematic. We only have about, I think it's 60 or so paper surveys, not even. Most of these were electronic.
Yeah, I should be 65, 67.
Got it. We did also deliver the hard copies of the survey through the libraries, and people filled them out and sent them back. They might have taken them home as a reminder to take the test at home. Obviously, the paper surveys don't have speed test results, so we did not map those. Thank you. Kelly? And we asked some opinion questions. I think there were more columns, but we will revise this. 5 questions we wanted to ask from a political perspective on behalf of the county executive. Should the county be using taxpayer dollars for broadband infrastructure? 70% said yes of the respondents to the questions versus only 18% who said no, 12 with no opinion. Should the county be operating a broadband infrastructure using taxpayer funds? Should the county offer public Wi-Fi using taxpayer funds? Should the county be exploring public-private partnerships? 80%, 79% say yes. And only 20% think that only private companies should provide access to high-speed internet. That may open the door to the county ultimately deciding to enter the business. Doubtful. That's just a democratic public opinion survey. That is not a political decision. But we did ask these public opinion questions as part of the survey. Kelly? And we've talked a little about affordable connectivity program. Our next step is to put a suite of recommendations together in front of Anna and ultimately in front of the county executive to decide how to make decisions, right? Is it more effective to address, Kelly, could you go back to the download speed map, please? One more, perfect. Is it a better investment of county funds, whatever source, is it better investment of county funds to fix 300 people in Rochester who don't have access? Or is it better to invest in some more rural areas? Should there be an emphasis on training programs and skills development programs and should there be the creation of additional adoption subsidies? We don't know. They're not mutually exclusive. There's probably a spectrum. They may be regionally dependent. We don't know yet. We just want to frame that whole conversation for the county to decide. So that's the essence of the presentation. Can I answer any questions for anyone? You got there first.
Okay, I was just, in my community, Greenlight has become available, and I'm just curious to know if they're benchmarking, if Greenlight was included at all.
I believe it was one of our alternatives. Greenlight was one of the enumerated choices. And so we're hearing nice things about Greenlight, that it's not an advertisement, but it was in our survey and it was a choice that people could select.
I'm, I can imagine years, I'm looking at, I hate to say the monopoly that Spectrum has, and I'm wondering, how much percent, I didn't actually know, I knew Frontier, but I didn't know the third option that you have at far right. So I'm just interested to learn over time where our consumers go.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment on behalf of Charter Spectrum. They're not a monopoly in any context. If anyone wants to enter the business, they can. Charter has no exclusive franchise to my knowledge. I don't think that's permissible.
That was an editorial.
Well, I understand, but I've seen people use the word monopoly, and that is not the case in the telecommunications domain. I think that's a fair statement. I'll tell you a story in Baltimore. Whoever this guy was a genius. Okay. Verizon cannot offer Fios in Baltimore across the city. Okay. The only monopoly provider is Comcast. So it's Comcast and little items, but there's no Verizon. Why? We investigated. Long ago and far away, before there was a Verizon, there was Bell Atlantic, which was one of the baby bells that split off from AT&T. And if you go back before that to the 1890s, they wanted to put in a telephone system in Baltimore. And some attorney, some little guy, long deceased, don't know who he is, put in that for telecommunications purposes, they could have their own conduit. Only they can have their own conduit, can't be challenged at a fixed rate of like 2 cents per linear foot forever in perpetuity. Whoever this lawyer was a genius. And there's no way, like Comcast has to pay, $3.10 a linear foot versus Verizon's grandfathered 2 cents per linear foot. Huge cost advantage in operating. And everyone says, it's terrible, Comcast is a monopoly. Verizon, you must make Verizon enter. And Verizon says, you don't have to enter. We have everything we need. We can put in our own conduit system that can't be denied. So monopolies don't exist in the telecommunications community. De facto monopolies, on the other hand, can control 75% of a market. And the only thing that can be done is to persuade and increase competition for whatever reasons, or appeal directly to the dominant provider for cost reductions. May I appeal to the dominant provider for cost reduction? Consider that advocation made on behalf of the county. Okay, would you consider different plans? Thank you. That was a direct appeal, by the way. Now you get to ask your question.
Just to confirm, for the speed test, this was just questions answered by those, filling out the survey, right? There was no, or not speed test, but the speed data, right? Thank you. So
those are only the respondents.
yes, just the respondents. You guys didn't, have some sort of speed test.
No. No, this is we did a broadband application. We outreached, we publicized the survey. Right, everybody gets it. By the way, we're closing it down. We promised we're going to close it down soon, and this is your last chance to take it. The county executive, if I'm not mistaken, sent out a reminder saying only 4 more days, and we shut this down the day after, and we mapped all the data. This data is actual captured real-time data using publicly available speed tests.
Got it. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
this is not, we didn't do any drive-bys. We didn't
I
do
didn't
any
think
drive.
so. I didn't think so. Thank you.
And what's interesting, you know, you've got some greens next to some reds. Is it a function of the plan? Right? Is it a function of how much, you know, is it a household income question, right? I can afford to buy a higher speed plan. What about persistent poverty areas? Are there any? I'm sure there are. Yes.
Just yesterday, I tagged you into this. There's actually a new published, it's a social capital map that if you take zip codes, it compares the zip codes. So when I was looking, as you just pointed out, that the difference in coloration, which would indicate that it might not be a technology issue. You know, it'd be interesting to overlay social community impact with utilization to see what other interventions can done, you know, participate.
We spoke about that directly with the task force today, right? Yeah, I mean, the conversations of, you know, relatively impoverished areas, about demographics in, you know, highly, how to phrase this delicately, densely populated people of color communities who may not have access to transportation or job opportunities. All of these things factor into access. And again, the scope of our engagement is to study how access can be improved, not to extend the infrastructure plant necessarily. There may be some recommendations that we make that suggest where there might be grant opportunities to expand infrastructure, but that's not part of our scope right now.
I didn't know until tonight that the central branch of the library has 300 MiFi devices that you can check out, just like a library book. So you can essentially bring internet access home with you, and they're consistently oversubscribed on devices. They received a grant to help purchase them, and I don't believe that many of our suburban rural branches have the same inventory. I thought that was interesting, and it struck me that, you know, perhaps some of the survey respondents may have taken a speed test using accessing the internet from one of those 9 devices.
Or one of their phones, or they weren't hardwired. I mean, there's any number of ways they could access the survey that would impact delivery service. But even if you took a Wi-Fi access point home from the library, you still have the device question that's impeding access, because as I mentioned earlier, I like checking my scores, but I can't write a document on my phone. It's just incapable. And if I have multiple people accessing at home on my single Wi-Fi device, I'm going to hit that data cap before I know it.
And Jennifer, to your question also, tomorrow we're meeting with the county has a GIS expert in our Department of Environmental Services, and we can overlay map layers on top of this map to indicate income, household income, value of the home, et cetera, concentration of poverty, and to do that. That's awesome. So we'll be able to show trends.
Yeah, and we'll be speaking with not only the mapping team, but we'll be speaking with, you know, Department of Environmental Services that runs the current Monroe County network.
That's awesome. So my last comment is
I don't believe you.
Unless I was thinking of the social determinants of health, and wondering like if we could get the surveys into churches and into, because you know that's where health is learning to go to get some of the screenings, that people are not going to their doctor, but certain people are still going to, you know, religious facilities, and so it'd be interesting to get social determinants of health as an overlay as well, just for the bigger picture.
Yep. Church, you know, churches' points of advocacy are very important. We spoke this morning about a program that I was involved in where we actually had, it was in response to a question from the Department of Aging. And the Department of Aging said, you know, how do we get programs to teach people, not only device and access, but how do we get training programs? And I worked at a city where we actually used youth from the community that wanted to develop skills and youth for, to be well-trained and sponsor the broadband program. And they're from the community. They're your neighborhood teenager or 20-something who is going around and sitting with old people like me and teaching me how to use the internet. It's a beautiful program, but it takes active management, and you have to define it as a program to make it work. But these kinds of tricks can pay huge dividends, whether you market through your churches or your libraries. Your churches or your libraries. You need to get the word out, and you need to educate people on why it's important, let alone how to use it. And I'm not sure everybody knows how important it could be or how life-changing it could be. I defy someone to apply for public assistance without support on the internet, which is why libraries are so important as community anchors, right? Yeah, even beyond Wi-Fi checkouts. You're allowed to ask more questions. I didn't mean to cut you off.
As far as I can find.
You have to ask a question, young woman.
I'm just listening. This is really interesting. I represent kids and parents and stuff and attorneys. And so internet has been a huge issue for my clients. And so seeing this information.
How do you find, let me ask a question. How do you find things have changed generally since COVID? Greater acknowledgement of the importance, a greater revelation of the disparities between people that have access and don't have access, and those that don't go home to cooked meals and Wi-Fi access.
I think all of this.
What do you hear in the ISP space?
Oh, gosh, I mean, for us, definitely the importance. Charter did a survey, we actually, more than the census block, we did an actual walkout, our field operations team.
Yep.
And we have this data, we're happy to, to share it with your team, but, we came up with how many people we found to be unserved, truly unserved.
Right.
And, one of the towns I know, they are, looking to partner with us, and, that would kind of fill in that gap. But, we have the other obvious issue specifically, in the cities, the densely populated areas, or the, some of the rural areas too, of just the cost. ACP, we are fully part of that program. We also have Spectrum Internet Assist, which existed, before that. So,
And that's the free lunch program for discounted access. If you have free lunch, you get a $10 subscription.
Yes, but essentially, yes.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, we certainly, we want to make sure everyone is served, and also that,
Good. Can I ask two more questions around the Affordable Connectivity Program?
Yes.
There's two ways I can enroll if I'm a recipient of assistance.
Yep.
Let's leave it at that. Okay. I can log into fcc.gov and I can collect all of my stuff and I can submit my applications, and I have to have access to a scanner so I can upload copies of my bills and things and to verify. Gee, I don't have broadband in the first place. How is it that I'm going to have a scanner and the knowledge to do all of this? Or I could say, dear Spectrum, can you enroll me? Which do you prefer?
We have a number of lists on our website, on our flyer, similar to the CA program, where you give your, kind of qualifications, and then we.
Right. We were talking about that today with the Broadband Task Force about, it's a relatively labor-intensive process for enrollment. It's not as streamlined as one would like.
Right.
It's right. We would encourage that. I think one of my recommendations is going to be, yeah, you could go to fcc.gov to apply for your $30 monthly subsidy, but your better approach is probably to go to Charter
Right.
or
That's
Greenlight or whomever. That would be the advocacy. I'm not taking a position here. I'm trying to enable for an unserved household or an underserved household or any household looking for subsidy for whatever reason, go to your provider. Rule 1. Rule 2, it is illegal if I apply for my $30 subsidy to say to XYZ provider, no one in this room, XYZ provider, I want the subsidy. Great, we'll give you the subsidy, but we have to downgrade you to our lowest speed 10/1. That is illegal right out of the box. If any provider tries to do that to you, you should report them to the FCC, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let's talk about your very generous offer. We would love to get a copy of Charter's unserved households for one reason. We are well aware of the BEAD obligations. We are scheduled to speak to the Empire State Development Group, who will be the group coordinating all the BEAD programs for New York State. BEAD, thank you. I was just about to go there. BEAD is a $42.45 billion broadband program that is being offered by the Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Back on May 13th, they issued a notice of funding opportunity for the $42 billion plus. The only recipients of that are the states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the territories, period. The states have an urgent obligation, and the state, New York State, by the way, has designated Empire State Development as the administrative entity to do this. Okay, now, process is as follows. All 52 states, unsurprisingly, have said, I want my share of that money. No one failed to reply by the deadline. So now the process is as follows. The states have to put together a complete map of every household in the state, because the allocation funding is going to be as follows. The state will define its set of unserved households. We know what unserved means, right? Less than 25. Underserved households, less than 100. And community anchors like libraries and schools and senior centers and any place where people could aggregate for access. The state is under an obligation to do the following. They've already received a $5 million grant program as part of their BEAD allocation, which stands for Broadband Equity, Access, and Development. And it's supposed to encourage investment in broadband infrastructure. The state has to do the following. A, took the $5 million, has put together a 5-year deployment plan focused on unserved areas and underserved areas, which is why the mapping data is so important. The FCC is collecting this data on the other hand, and the FCC is supposed to clean up this data and resolve all challenges before the NTIA makes its allocation decision. The NTIA is supposed to allocate that $42 billion proportional to the number of unserved households in New York State as a portion of the nation, and then underserved as a portion of the nation, and then community anchors as a portion of the nation. You'll notice there's a flaw, potentially. If you fail to report what households are unserved, your state is going to get a lower amount of data, of money, than it should for subsequent funding programs. And so when I hear a generous offer from Charter that says, we've already done this testing and this data collection, and we'd be glad to share it with you on behalf of Ms. Liss and County Executive Bello, would you share it with us under non-disclosure? The only eligible use would be to improve our maps so that Monroe County, just as the state has to report data to NTIA to get its portion of the money, we would like Monroe County to have the most accurate data it has so that the state gets its money. I want to be very clear. There's no entitlement to Monroe County. Okay, but for the greater good of New York State, identifying all the unserved households will get New York State the most money that will then be distributed in subsequent programs. So there's no direct benefit other than for the greater good of New York State. And let's be fair, who wants New York State to get the most money it can get? No offense, every other state would say exactly the same thing. But if you're making the offer to share that data under non-disclosure,
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah.
let's talk.
Yeah.
That's that, because Because again, the process, I literally was on a call with another state having this exact conversation. That state is ahead of New York State. Let's call them state X. They already have published the revised map. They already are opening their challenge process. And we were just talking about how can we submit our challenge data that we know in state X to your map so you can get it to the NTIA, or they said to FCC. If you carefully read the BEAD NOVO, as I have, there's a couple of loopholes there. The Department of Commerce is obligated by statute under the bipartisan investment law, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $42.45 billion directly allocated to NTIA to distribute, non-negotiable. NTIA has published a funding opportunity that says they are going to do this, and they have to do this mapping, and they have to do a 5-year plan, and they have to submit money, and they will get a portion of the calculated allocated funds, 20%, and they submit that initial plan. But you know what? FCC is not obligated to any time-sensitive delivery. And FCC, in my opinion, is behind the 8 ball because they're collecting all of this data on September 1. This is the first round they've ever collected this data from ISPs. And I would suggest that by the time FCC gets through their adjudication process to resolve all of the challenges, they're going to be way past the BEAD allocation deadline. And so this is my plea. Any data we get that make Monroe County more effective, we would love to get. And that will, by the way, serve a second order effect. It'll help inform county executive fellows' decisions on where to invest or not to invest. So thank you for the offer. We will be in touch.
Yeah.
Here, wait, make sure to get my card and yours. I'm sorry? Right. Now, as long as we're talking, since the emphasis is on access from Monroe County's perspective in our engagement, you'll notice there's nothing related to writing grants. There's nothing related to expanding infrastructure. Those could be follow-up engagements. But there is another program, $2.5 billion, 2.75, I think it was, mere $2.75 billion, called the Digital Equity Act, that is supposed to come up with improved digital equity access, training programs, skills development programs, job development programs. And by the way, we can analogize these two programs. The DEA, the eligible entities are only the 50 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the territories. Only $2.75 billion. Their first obligation, they get some seed money to do planning. They have to put together a 5-year plan. These two 5-year plans, NTIA, who is administering both programs, wants them to be mutually reinforcing. And they have a 5-year plan, and they'll get their proportional to be allocated later. So there is some attention to skills development, job training, adoption, encouraging library usage. So there's two major programs totaling $46 billion. And we're pleased that New York State is involved in both of them. We're not pleased that FCC, this is a personal opinion, not official Magellan. FCC is behind the 8 ball. Interestingly, somehow they missed that the FCC has to be obligated, time sensitive, to give good data to NTIA. But if you carefully read the BEAD notice of funding opportunity, NTIA is going to make the decision on best available data, which begs the question over, is FCC authoritative or is NTIA authoritative, and to what degree? How much flexibility does NTIA have? I was having that debate just earlier today because I don't know what the answer is. And you know something? I spoke to NTIA last week. They don't know what the answer is either, which is not surprising in a program of this magnitude, right? By the way, NTIA is going to impose burdens on Empire State Development. NTIA, in return for, I'm picking a number out of the air, let's say roughly a 50th of the 40.42 billion. Suppose New York State gets $1 billion. Just like any other grant recipient, New York State is going to be obligated for single audit and compliance and tracking program performance and getting all of these things. NTIA did a very good job in their BEAD NOFO. Dear New York State, By the way, when you issue subgrants using that $1 billion to areas proportional to primarily resolving access to unserved areas, right? And only then can they start allocating money to underserved areas, and only then to community anchors. New York State, you're obligated to supervise and manage compliance on those programs, just as we, the NTIA, will be monitoring you, the state. And if you fail to do so, we can call back funds. Very well done, Department of Commerce. I applaud you. I don't know if New York State understands what they bit off here. We'll find out. We're scheduled to talk to New York State shortly. But we would love any data that gives us better mapping data for challenges is an informal request or formal request as agent for Ms. Liss and County Executive Fellow.
I should take that a step further and, get in touch with Frontier, get in touch with Greenlight, the other ISPs in the area. It's hard. You're not required to provide that information. So.
No, you're not required. And we have taken the position so far that there should be an advocacy to every ISP to take this very seriously.
Right.
Reporting this data to the FCC under fines. Let's be fair. What's the FCC to find? In the grand scheme of charter spectrum, that's rounding error on their bottom line. Maybe not for Greenlight, but for charter spectrum. I am sure everybody's doing their best, but it's an incredibly tight timeline.
Sure, and we typically have this really. I'm not gonna tell you how much I bought for, we really wanna.
And we want to get a partner. I mean, our problem here is not, I don't know, I can't say deterministically that the county doesn't play a different role than they play today. Clearly, they're a provider of government services. Clearly, they're an owner of infrastructure. Do they want to get into the ISP business? Probably not. I'm leaving a door open, right? Somebody could decide that later. What they really want is for everybody to have affordable access to reliable internet. Everyone. Which is, very interestingly, the exact same goal that President Biden and Internet for All has. Access to all for internet. How we get there, yeah, there are frictions along the way through the delivery chain down to households. If there are households that don't even know they need broadband, that's a harder problem. So we've got a lot of outreach efforts we're gonna have to work on. I mean, there's lots to do, but the goal is the same. How do we get everyone access to affordable, high-speed broadband? And notice if you caught in the seesaw items, all the grants are governed and required the delivery of 100 megabit down and 100 megabit up. So even the FCC, by the way, Chairman Rosenworcel. Yeah, here's our, this is today's FCC guidance. This is ARPA Treasury guidance. And Chairman Rosenworcel, Chairwoman Rosenworcel, I don't mean to be sexist, but FCC Chairman Rosenworcel posted a notice of inquiry 3 weeks ago, I believe, saying she wants to redefine the FCC definition to 100/100. And very good, prospectively laying the groundwork for upgrades to 1 gig as a requirement. That might not happen in my lifetime. I can't imagine whether that even gets implemented before the BEAD monies are exhausted in 2026. The FCC is not known for agility. We'll leave it at that. But everyone knows the trend is going toward 100/100. And if you think fixed wireless, which is another technology, is your answer, it's not. It can be a very good point solution in particular areas. It's not your general broadband access, I think. All comments attributable to me. They're not all official, right? Some of them are opinions. They're not meant to be anything other than educational and informative. And thank you for joining us. Any other questions? You didn't ask a question. Are you her bodyguard? Is that why are you here?
Oh, yeah. His questions are the same as mine. So there.
But, and we are as open, I thought she was your bodyguard. Second,
Thank you. I've been working out.
but again, we're all trying to solve the same problem. We're trying to get access to everyone. And whether that means more infrastructure or not, or the role of the county, all of those are futures. We haven't gotten to that point. But I will tell you, everything that is shown there is actual collected point survey information, geocoded to a specific household. Okay. I can only say thank you. Appreciate it. And if anyone wants a card, please.